everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
Joe is not with us tonight, so we thought we would take the reins and present to you our interview with inker, artist, all-around awesome guy, Steve Leialoha. I think Steve is awesome for a number of reasons. The biggest one being he has a G.I. Joe figure named after him. He's good friends with Larry Hama. He worked a lot on G.I. Joe, and any man who's cool enough to be part of the Joe team is aces in my book.
Love this interview. Love Steve. Be on the lookout for a whopper of a Star Wars story. By virtue of his connections, the work he was doing at the time, he was able to see a rough cut of Star Wars and has a lot of interesting things to say about it. So let's get to it. Without further ado, this is Steve Leialoha.
Aloha. Yes.
Yes. I will start off with the same question we ask everyone. How did you get your start in comics?
Oh, without making it too complicated.
You can be complicated. That's fine.
Well, trying to think, what does it mean to start in comics? As a kid, growing up in San Francisco, the perceived wisdom at the time was that you had to live in New York to work in, mainstream comics. Although, I guess, at that point, there were no other comics. We're talking, in the 60s. But I was always interested in drawing, and eventually I went to my first convention, which was the San Diego Comic Convention in 1970. The first one was 69, and I went to the second. And I met people like Scott Shaw and Mark Evanier. And I didn't exactly meet Jack Kirby, but he was the guest of honor, and that was the main reason I wanted to go to that, because he was a big inspiration to me, as well as, as he was to so many. And I was drawing at that time. I showed my work around and began to get a little bit of work doing things for underground comics. The first thing I ever did that I was actually paid for as a professional was for Dennis Kitchen I just blanked out on the title. High Adventure. It only went one issue, but Mark Evanier wrote it. I drew it. John Pound inked it. Roger Friedman did the lettering. But in hindsight, it was definitely a beginning kind of job, and I just kept at it for a while, and skip ahead to 1974, I think it was. Living in the San Francisco Bay Area, suddenly there were these guys who were working on mainstream comics. I should also point out that the idea that you had to live in New York was a thing of the past by that point. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll try to get work doing comics. And in a roundabout way, Jim Starlin had moved to San Francisco, and he was looking to find someone to ink for him so that he could do a complete book on the West Coast and send it into Marvel completely finished. So I did some samples for him, and he liked what he saw. And I got the job of inking Warlock, which at that point in time was my favorite Marvel book. So I really lucked out. And Frank Brunner, who had also moved to the Bay Area, was also looking for an inker on his new project, which was Howard the Duck. So in the space of a few months, I managed to become the inker on Warlock and Howard the Duck. This was in 1975. So I think of working for Marvel coming in through the side door, you might say, because I had never submitted anything to them personally, but And in another it's a small world sort of thing, the editor-in-chief at that time was Marv Wolfman, who I had never actually met, but I had done some fanzine work for him when I was in high school, like 7 or 8 years early. So he was aware of my work, and he said that, we'll see how he does if it doesn't work out. But fortunately, it did work out. So that's how I started working at Marvel. And then working on Howard the Duck, Frank left it really quickly after only 2 issues. And then it was John Buscema and then Gene Colan, which are, to my mind, is like being tossed into the deep end of the pool and like sink or swim. But fortunately, those guys are so good that I think you really have to work at it to mess it up. But anyway, it all worked out. So, and I've been at it ever since.
So what was it like for you working, you get your start and you're working at Marvel and, doing my research, as you said, you worked on Warlock, Howard the Duck, which, might I add, is pretty damn cool. I think Howard the Duck gets a bad rap because of one bad movie.
Not from me.
No, I'm just saying.
I must admit, I've never actually seen the movie.
No, and you're better for it. Let's be honest.
At a certain point, I thought maybe I shouldn't see it.
Yeah, at least you could say, if you did, you'd be like, yeah, I saw it. But, you would lose an hour and a half of your life. I
can appreciate people that a lot of people say that they really loved it, and which is nice.
Yeah.
My brother actually even worked on the movie, but I haven't seen it. So.
Oh, now you have to see it.
He was a lighting guy, so.
You want to see his lighting work?
Yeah, he lit the doll.
Apparently, it worked. So, no, a lot of it was filmed in San Francisco, where he was working as a lighting guy, like at the Cow Palace and a lot of the large venues, the big shows. So anyway, just a minor point.
No, that's interesting. So getting your start in Marvel and working on some really interesting titles. When you're what was that experience like for you? You're getting kind of, as you said, like kind of you're in the deep end of the pool getting your start. Are you, as an artist, are you trying to bring your own flavor to the job, or are you trying to not emulate, but at least, be inspired by some other previous artists at that time? Or, what is your experience like?
I was a huge fan. I've been a comics fan since I was a little kid, so there's tons of artists whose work I liked. For me, it was really sort of, you might say, on-the-job learning. Just trying to keep up, trying to make sure everything looked halfway decent. My approach was just to be neat and just, try not to ink outside the lines. But it is a learning process. When I started at Marvel, my drawing wasn't much, but it's basically on the job learning, which is very handy. I was a huge fan of guys that ink with a brush. My favorites when I was a kid were Carmine Infantino and Gil Kane, as inked by Murphy Anderson. As I got older, of course, there are tons of artists whose work I loved. Joe Kubert and I tend to say all the usual. So it's just learning by seeing what others are doing. I was fortunate enough to, when visiting New York, dropping in on Neil Adams, Dick Giordano's Continuity Associates, which had obviously some of the best comics artists in the business, all working away, and being able to watching these guys working watching Neil Adams inking with a brush, he gave me a few tips, which I still remember the advice he gave me on various little things here and there. Not that he'd remember it, but I mean, there was a constant parade of people going through that place. I mean, it was a studio, so there are lots of people up there. Terry Austin had a cubicle up there. Larry Hama, Jack Abel, Russ Heath. I forget who else at that particular point in time. Anyway, it was a very inspiring thing and very, very interesting learning techniques of how to do stuff. The modern technology of the time, using artographs and blowing up your sketches so you can trace them off and all of that sort of thing. Anyway, it's fabulous for me. Anyway, I think I've wandered off whatever point.
No, absolutely. I find this very interesting.
Who were some of the artists that you got to ink over that were some of your, favorite?
Well, as when I first got into the business, one of my goals was to ink as many of the artists whose work inspired me to get into comics in the first place, which I managed to do quite a bit. Like inking, however briefly, Jack Kirby and Gil Kane and Carmine Infantino, Joe Kubert. I can't even think. John Buscema, Sal Buscema. I know I could just go on and on. Gene Colan in particular. That was my personal favorite to ink was Gene Colan, because his pencil work was so fabulous. In fact, it looked so good that the first thought was nobody should ink this, but since it did have to be inked, I was happy to do it. So who else? I know there's more. Marie Severin, got to work with her. Never worked with John Romita, although he did fix up a few of the drawings that I did, which was very helpful. I mean, people criticize John Romita for having, changed all the faces, but generally speaking, that was a good thing. So, anyway, those, off the top of my head, those are the ones I can think of. I was also a huge fan of the Filipino artists, so I got to, watching those guys working, doing their magic thing with the brush. Guys like Rudy Nebres and Nestor Redondo. Alex Nino is a particular favorite of mine. And I know there's lots more.
It's great that you got to work with a lot of the sort of list that you made.
Yes, I made it. Oh, how could I forget? And Steve Ditko. So that,
Right.
And I even met him once, ran into him once at Marvel. And I had just inked an issue of ROM, and he said he liked it. So I took that at face value, and so that was good.
High praise.
Exactly. I mean, he's still one of my favorite artists. And I mean, I look at that stuff and it's just, he made it look so effortless. Yeah. Plus, it's really wonky stuff, which is the kind of things I really like. So.
Well, one miniseries that you worked on that I got into when I first started getting into comics was Firestar. And
yes, Mary Wilshire.
Yep.
He's a terrific artist also.
And that she was created for the TV show, and then they tried to, I guess, push her into the comics. Was she seen as sort of a breakout star? Was there a big push behind this book, or how was it sort of pitched to you?
I must admit, I have no idea. For me, it was just an opportunity to work with Mary.
Okay.
So I think I inked 3 issues. Although I think it was just 4-issue run.
Yep.
So, so I don't know. Yes, I met some of the people who actually worked on the show, but those kinds of books at Marvel were always a little strange. The licensed things. Um, editorially, they seemed to feel that they weren't really Marvel books, so it's always a little strange. I mean, I eventually worked on, for example, G.I. Joe, which was not technically a Marvel book, but that seemed to go well. I mean, that was a situation where there's a point where I didn't have any work, so I just talked to a few editors up at Marvel, said I was available if you have anything that might want to send my way. And Larry Hama suggested inking an issue of G.I. Joe, which I was a little skeptical at first, but then he said he was both writing it and drawing it, and I've been a longtime fan of his drawing. I mean, he's a very solid writer and artist who's, for some reason, seems to fly under the radar of a lot of the fans, but
not
really,
us, because we've tried to get him many times.
Really? Oh, you definitely should. He has a lot of interesting things to say.
I wish we could, trust me.
He's done so many interesting things. The first time I met him, he was performing in Pacific Overtures, Stephen Sondheim thing with Mako and various other people. But then I do remember I was visiting Continuity Studios in New York when he was on an episode of MASH. Everyone, they set up a TV and everyone watched that particular episode where he plays a grumpy North Korean soldier. Anyway, so yeah, the license things and the spin-offs from the toys always seem to be like second-tier group comics by editorial standards. And I worked on several of those: ROM, G.I. Joe, and of course the one that started it all, which was Star Wars. So,
Oh, that little thing?
that one came out of nowhere.
I think they got something with that Star Wars. You mentioned G.I. Joe, which is a huge part of our childhood, and I think we can discuss G.I. Joe for just hours. But rumor has it you had a G.I. Joe named after you because of your relationship and friendship with Larry Hama.
Well, as Larry said, he wanted to have a character that had a Hawaiian name, and he only knew one Hawaiian name, which was mine. So he used my name, which is fine by me. I'm quite honored to have been part of the G.I. Joe mythos.
Damn right, that's awesome.
And what I thought was funny was that he gave the character Torpedo a different name than my name, but the name he picked just happens to be my middle name. So
It's Edward, right?
Can't get away from it. Yes. It was my grandfather's. I was named.
I had that figure, by the way.
So
no joke, I tried to look for it before I came here so I could show you. However, there's a fair amount of my G.I. Joe figures that are now falling apart. But
I bought several of them over the years, and the little rubber bands that hold it together disintegrate.
Yeah.
So you just have a little pile of parts there. So.
I dug out a number of my old toys for my son, who's 6, and he was all excited. And needless to say, He-Man, Transformers, Thundercats, and G.I. Joe, all in relatively good condition. However, if you look at the G.I. Joes the wrong way, the legs just burst right off.
Yes.
So I will say your figure is in intensive care right now.
Yes.
But I have it, so that's,
I have picked up several of them over the years. So
when you're working on
I have one it's from Canadian one, so it's in French and English, which I rather like.
There's a whole separate market for those those types of figures. I've found out. I mean, everyone obviously wants, the old toys, but then you have the, the lesser known or lesser, traded ones are found, the overseas ones. So like the French and, versions of those toys, and they go for big money.
Wow.
Big money.
I'm keeping mine. So.
No, obviously I would too, but I can't buy them. But when you're working on properties that are not, let's say, Marvel or anything else, they're other brand properties. Are you in any way under? I don't know. Do you have to conform to any other types of standards when you're doing your work? Because it seems like this is it. It's theirs. Obviously, like it would be any other brand, but it's a little different situation. It's not like, you're doing a Marvel specific character. This is Hasbro stuff. So do you have to treat it any differently?
I don't. Usually I've often come across into these things as an inker who is like sort of the last person on the assembly line. So I just try to make it look as good as I can. So all of the dealing with the things could get very complicated with working with these companies. They're usually extremely fussy in ways that have no rational bearing on whatever it is we're doing.
Well, I'm sure too many cooks in the kitchen type of situation.
Exactly. I mean, there's all sorts of amusing stories. I remember Kyle Baker talking about working on the Dick Tracy adaptation where Warren Beatty, he preferred one side of his face to be filmed. And so he wanted the comic drawn that way, as if that would make any difference. So, I mean, anyway, Kyle said it drove him crazy. But anyway, the answer is no. I haven't had to work with the people who are particularly fussy about these things. I mean, G.I. Joe was just the comic. It was its own thing. So there was, as was Rom and well, Star Wars was a little different because we were working on replicating a movie somehow, a movie that no one had seen except me. But yes.
You saw it before other people did? I
did. I was the first one on the.
How do you breeze over that?
On the creative team. That I mean, Howard Chaykin had been given tons of stills, but there was no footage to be seen at that point.
Okay.
Well, let's see. In terms of timing, I started as an inker on the second issue, which was trying to place it in time, was I think January 1976. And there was a rough cut screening of Star Wars on Valentine's Day, which I got invited to. Me and Tom Orzechowski, who was doing the lettering on the book, got invited to this thing. And we were the only two non-movie people who were at this particular screening. And that was a rough cut screening 3 months before it was scheduled to come out. So the version we saw was the completely raw footage with no special effects at all. Zero special effects.
Pew pew.
Exactly. It was like cat pistols, little arrows pointing to where it was supposed to go off. Little explosions in the room. Raw sound. It was Darth Vader's original Scottish voice.
Oh yeah.
And things like that. I mean, there was, like, for example, Tatooine. The one that explodes at the beginning of the...
that one.
Oh,
that
Alderaan?
One.
Alderaan, yeah.
Alderaan, yes. the princess, is shocked to see the planet explode, and what we saw was just a still of the planet,
and a guy going bang.
Anyway, before the thing started, George Lucas got up and explained what we were about to see, and apologized for the fact that nothing that was actually hinted at was seen on the screen. Anyways, very interesting. It was the first time I'd ever actually seen a rough cut, and the last time, to be honest. But it's very interesting, and it was dubbed in. But found music was in the score, so it wasn't the John Williams score. The TIE fighters fighting in space and Death Star and all of that stuff was World War II footage spliced in. It's like, this is how it's gonna look.
Yeah, which, what I recall, they actually matched that footage
Exactly.
of those dogfights in the air for the TIE fighters and the X-Wings and stuff.
So it was real aerial footage, but then turned into...
they just put a guy in a black suit and some whiny kid in it. That's all.
Exactly.
So when you finally saw the finished product, you must have been like, holy crap, they pulled it off.
Exactly. I mean, it really is... it was a crash course in state-of-the-art professional filmmaking to see what they managed to accomplish in the really short amount of time between when I saw it and like 3 months later.
Did a lot in 3 months.
Exactly. I mean, they John Williams wrote the music, scored it, they put it in, finished all the special, obviously. But yes, it was unbelievably impressive to see the finished product. And I was invited to the cast and crew screening, so the first time I saw it was at that. So all of the American actors were there, and it was at the Academy Theater. So it's fabulous sound, a great scene, a screen. So yes, it was an awesome experience.
It's amazing you got to see a rope.
That is really awesome.
I mean,
also it was a very small screening room that fit about 50 people. There was maybe 30 people there. People like Alan Ladd Jr. This was all done by way of Charlie Lippincott, who was in charge of the Star Wars comics stuff. And he invited me up to that. And he was there, and Alan Ladd Jr., John Williams was there, George Lucas, of course. I ended up sitting next to Philip Kaufman and Brian De Palma.
Wow.
So it is a very interesting group of people. A lot of 20th Century Fox executives were there. But I mean, this was in a little nondescript production house, just a regular house that they turned into a production office up in Marin.
were you asked for your advice and opinion on how to make the film pop?
Oh, yes. But to be honest, it was hard to tell if this movie was going to be any good.
Really?
That's what I've heard.
I mean, it was interesting, but I hadn't really thought of, projecting into it the possibilities of what they could do rather than simply seeing it at face value. Another lesson learned. So
that's awesome.
So anyway, I wanted to shift, although it's I don't know if it's a come down necessarily from such heights of watching the Star Wars rough cut, but moving from Marvel to the distinguished competition, you obviously did some work at DC. I think sort of sequentially. I mean, in the early '90s,
yes,
right?
as a freelancer, there was a time when I was doing a bit of work for both companies. So,
Oh, okay. There was some overlap there.
yes.
I'm curious, you gave us some perspective on your Marvel, influences and who your favorite artists were and stuff. What did you like at DC? What characters were you thrilled by doing? And, who did you enjoy inking over?
Well, I was always a DC and Marvel fan. So even though I must say Marvel was my favorite, at a certain point, all of the people that I'd been working with at DC were all working. All the people I'd been working with at Marvel all kind of moved over to DC. So I was working with the same people at DC that I had been working with at Marvel. Like editor Mike Carlin comes to mind. I'd done work with him at Marvel. Suddenly he was at DC, and so I ended up doing like inking on what was it? Just blanked out. So many different things. Doing Superman, working on Superman and various Batman projects, and a whole range of things.
Yeah, you were big. You were part of the Batman 400
Yes.
issue. If I remember correctly, was that one of the covers, one of the sort of chromy covers on that one?
That was Bill Sienkiewicz did the cover on that one. Another fabulous Bill Sienkiewicz cover.
Yes.
And I got to draw, I think 2 or 3 pages for that. So my career started as working as an inker, and at a certain point, they figured my drawing was good enough to let me try a few things. So I slowly started drawing stuff for DC as well. Anyway, I know we're skipping around a lot.
No,
that's what we do.
Non-linear, but yes. But I tended to gravitate to the weirder stuff, the non-superhero stuff, as much as I enjoy working on the superhero stuff. Of course, at a certain point, once you've done Batman, then you've done Batman and Superman. So it's like, okay,
you know what?
I can do other things now too. So
the weirder stuff is better. And quality-wise, I've noticed, like, you have your Supermans and Batmans and, your big Spider-Mans and whatnot, because those are also great. But, the lesser-known, weirder stuff, I've always find that they just tend to be more interesting and a little bit better.
I always think they're more fun because, everyone's looking at Batman, so you better not screw up.
Right.
But you can have a lot of fun on the so-called lesser titles.
But they become cookie cutter after a while. So you kind of know what you're going to get with Superman and Batman. And you have a little room to play when you get the other stuff. Exactly.
I got to draw, for example, a spin-off of Sandman stuff. I sort of got my foot in the water by inking a couple of pages on of Sandman from the original run. Another chance encounter that, some of these things just happen out of the blue. I ended up inking 2 pages of Sandman, and sort of they got to know me over there, Karen Berger and Shelley Bond. So I ended up over the years doing a lot of work at Vertigo, which is sort of more of my temperament, you might say. So to get back what you had asked a while ago, a lot of the work that I tended to gravitate towards was more towards people I liked working with, as well as, characters where you could have a lot of fun playing around with, especially if you're the first one on the character and you can make up your own things. Anyway, like the Petrofax 4-issue miniseries I did at Vertigo, which was a minor character in Sandman, and got a few of his own adventures, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And the Dead Boy Detectives.
Dead Boy Detectives, working with Brian Talbot. Yes.
Yep. So to back up, I'd love to know how, you said you got these 2 pages in Sandman, which is amazing on its face because now you are part of the, Sandman legacy.
I've gotten a lot of mileage out of the 2 pages I did out of their, the magnum opus.
Yeah. I mean, it opened these doors to the rest of Vertigo for you, right?
Yes. It's just one of those chance things where I was on my way to a convention in London, and Brian Talbot is a longtime friend of ours, so we dropped in to visit him, and the plan was to go from there. He lived in outside of Liverpool. Plan was to go from there to the convention in London, but Brian couldn't go until he finished up the last 2 pages of, I think it's World's End.
Right.
Scripts were running late, as they often did. So he had to wait for the script for the last 2 pages of his story arc, and he couldn't go until that was finished. And it's almost like a drama where at the last second, Neil faxes over the last 2 pages of the script, as it was done in those days. And the regular inker on that book had planned a well-earned vacation. So even though the last 2 pages still needed to be inked, the regular inker was unavailable. So Brian just asked Karen Berger if it's okay if I inked it. And I think, in a moment of desperation, she said, sure, why not? Anyway, so we stayed up all night, Brian drawing it. And as he finished things, I would ink it. And by the next morning, the 2 pages were finished, and send it off to New York. And we could all go off to the convention and have a good time. And also stylistically, it kind of worked in context, because the last 2 pages were, the main story took place in wherever it was. But the last 2 pages, it's in our world, and it's a completely different look. So the fact that the style suddenly changes without notice sort of works worked in context. So I spent, a whole evening working on Sandman, and it worked out well. I mean, from that point on, I started doing things over at the Vertigo offices. Can't remember I guess it was Vertigo at that point.
Would have been Vertigo, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, because I had done Swamp Thing stuff, which instigated the Vertigo imprint.
Right.
As they thought
Although Swamp Thing tends to
this stuff is
jump
so
back and forth.
Vertigo and DC, and
Yes, exactly.
Right.
But anyway, so that was my foot in that particular editorial door.
I mean, not bad for one night of work.
No.
It was fun.
A whole new world.
fun with a brush, as we like to say.
Yeah.
No, it's also, just working with Brian was as always, you have to try to do the very best you can, because certainly didn't want to disappoint him. One of my favorite comics artists. So.
And so I guess that eventually.
I also
go
wanted
ahead.
to
Sorry.
mention that the inker who was on holiday was Mark Buckingham, which, well, of course, I have since been working with for the past 20 years, and I'm still working with now. We're working on a continuation, new Fables stories.
Oh, great.
So,
Well, we were about to sort of segue to that. You know, it seemed like this one night of Sandman, which led to all this other Vertigo stuff,
I know.
probably led to Fables as well, right?
yes, and
In
again,
an indirect way, maybe.
and again, that was one of those things where I can't remember. I think I was working on something else at the time, and there was some sort of a deadline crunch, and they asked me to ink the first story of this new series that they were doing, but they already had a regular art team, which was Mark Buckingham. So anyway, the idea was it was just be a one shot, but it worked out and I stayed on the book because the first issue was drawn by Lan Medina. And as Fables was structured at that particular point in time, it was an introductory story with not the main artist. And then Mark Buckingham would pick it up and do the regular stories after that short arc. Anyway, it all worked out very nicely. And I must admit, I really liked the premise and the writing, and the whole thing was fabulous. So
Yeah, that Fables was
I kind of stuck around. And
yeah, you did for most of it, I'd say. It was
I worked on the first issue and I worked on the last issue. So
really?
yes.
That's it? Because then
Well,
somebody
I worked in quite a few in between as well.
Yeah.
There were many artists.
Fables was
That's what I
Fables-
liked about the book, was that there were so many different. There wasn't one look. It didn't have to look a specific way.
Mhm.
Every interpretation was valid.
that was a big it was a big deal comic for me because, and I'm just going to be a little quick backstory. When I first started dating my now wife, I told her, "Look, I collect comics. I don't drink much, except for the wine I'm drinking now.
Few vices,
A few glasses. I don't do anything else, but I do collect comics, and I'm an avid comic book collector. So, she'd see me go, and I'd buy a stack, and then, and hey, there's a cat. So, she would have to contend with me reading my stack of comics, and she would see what I'm reading. And she got into Fables because of, seeing me read it. And I'm like, you're going to enjoy this. I think you should pick it up and just give it a try. Because it was along the lines of the stuff that she liked. She liked the classic stories, the characters, but, with a twist on them. So she got into Fables because of me. And I was like, when I told her that I was talking to you, she was like, oh, well, that's usually, our wives, when we talk about what we're doing, they're like, oh, okay, cool. But when I brought up, notable, topics and characters and stuff, they're like, oh, she perked right up. So, I was a huge fan of Fables for a very long time, and then I had kids, and then, my life fell apart. What I would love to know is, you're working on a story like this with characters that everyone is just, beloved characters from our childhood and throughout history, but just, turn on their ear. What's that like for you? And, can you just have fun with it in any way?
Well, definitely. I mean, that was the whole idea, was to have fun. I was definitely lucky to be working on a book that I actually enjoyed reading and looked forward to the next one, which is not to say that the things I worked on that I didn't were things that I didn't enjoy. But it's just the appeal. I mean, hopefully when you're working in a business like that, if you can actually work on a book that you like and like to read. I mean, when I first came aboard this so-called career, excuse me, working on Warlock and Howard the Duck was, in my mind, sort of, it did set the bar rather high in terms of books I like to work on. But to my mind, Fables is definitely in that category. So, I mean, I love the writing. I love I like to draw my own stuff as well, but I'm certainly happy to just be an inker on this. Although I did draw a little bit of it myself, which is nice. But there were so many guest artists who were just, I mean, some of the best in the business dropped in from time to time. So it was always great. I mean, covers by James Jean, just for example. I mean, our editor, Shelley Bond, he came up to the office with his portfolio right out of art school. They immediately grabbed him up and said, come with me. So it was, great to have him on the first, I think 80 issues, something like that. And, all the other artists, I mean, so many fabulous artists. It's just a bit humbling to be amongst that particular crowd. Anyway, I again lost the train of thought.
No, I'm just fanboying out here on you, just saying how much we enjoyed your series, and it was
a lot of people, well, male comics fans whose female friends were not comics fans. We heard a lot that a lot of them, said, try Fables. You might like this.
Yeah, it worked.
Yes.
And now I'm married because of it.
So it worked out.
Worked out well.
Vertigo in general has a more favorable track record with the significant others, I would say.
Yes, and it was also the inspiration for the ABC series, series. They went their own.
Yeah. I
mean, originally they
Once Upon a Time, was it?
There was an idea that they would adapt Fables, and I think at a certain point, Bill Willingham mentioned to them that these are all public domain characters, and they said, "Oh, yes, we could do our own show then."
Right.
So they took a similar premise and did it with all the Disney characters.
Oh, I told her about that too. I'm like, you've seen this before. She's like, what? No, this is. Yes. I'm like, no. Remember the little comic I told you about a few years ago that you read that you loved? Yeah, this is it.
Yes, that's where that show got its start.
Except now it's Disney, so everything's like, ooh.
Well,
sorry. Fables did it better.
Exactly.
Can we say that?
Yes, we can. We're not owned by Disney.
I think so, but perhaps I'm biased.
Oh. Would you say overall in your career you preferred inking or penciling more?
I've always liked to go back and forth. I mean, before I got on Fables, I would sort of like spend 6 months drawing something, and then 6 months inking something. Fables was so much fun that I sort of just kept doing that for the whole run. I did take some time out in the middle of working on as inking Fables to do there was a prose Fables novel that Bill Willingham wrote that I did the illustrations for. So that was a lot of fun. But I like both. It's
Are there projects that you're offered or that you pursue that you feel like are more penciling jobs than inking, like that you want to feel like you want to pencil or feel like you want to ink? I guess maybe if there's a penciler already, obviously those are ones that you glom onto because you want to ink it. But
well, at this point, I mostly working on either my own projects, which haven't gotten very far, but or working on interesting inking things that come along. But my main thing right at the moment is inking Fables, or, like 5 issues in. The idea is to get ahead before subjecting ourselves to the dreaded deadline doom. But I did a few one-off things, like inking some stuff with Larry Hama on a few G.I. Joe projects. There's I forget the specifics. I should be better informed of this stuff, but Larry Hama just drew a new version of the cover for the silent issue of G.I. Joe that I inked. And I've seen it in color now. It looks very nice. Because Larry didn't draw the cover of the original one. Just thought it'd be nice to see what he would do. Of course, it looks fabulous, I think.
That was the Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes issue.
Exactly, that one. The legendary wordless one.
Yes. And then eventually, didn't feel like Marvel took that one step further and did like a whole month of wordless books at some point? Am I making that up?
I don't exactly remember that. I can't imagine.
I think it
how that
happened.
would go.
I maybe, maybe
Maybe
Monday night.
What are you
craziness,
talking
but-
about?
Yeah.
maybe you just tuned out and
That was the fastest month of comics ever. And I was like, what? We're
One
done.
too many glasses of wine and the words disappear, and they're all silent books to me.
Before we go, Steve, I first off, I want to thank you because you have
my
some
pleasure.
awesome stories, and I think we could probably pick your brain for another hour. But where can fans follow you? Any social media, links that we can inform our fans about?
Well, I must confess, I try not to do that too much. It's because I should be working.
Fair enough.
Good point.
But
You should be working too.
no, I know it's not particularly professional. I don't have a website or anything.
No, it's fine.
But
Do you have anything coming up that we could look forward to?
well, there is Fables.
There's Fables, yeah.
I think it has been announced, and I forget exactly when it's due to start up, but it's a 12-issue run. I'm not even sure where the story is going. I prefer not to know ahead of time. Just it helps to keep up the enthusiasm as the pages come through.
This is all new, Fables.
All
stuff.
new stuff.
Okay.
Mark Buckingham has outdone himself. I mean, it's just really nice stuff that he's doing. So I do, and well, I've seen the first bits. It's looking very good. If I can say
forward
so
to it.
myself.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, I'm certainly looking forward to it. And then when I mention it to my wife, she will as well.
More to come. There's more of it, and the storyline is plotted out. So there's, tempted to say there's more depth, but there was a lot of depth in the old ones. But there's still, it focuses in on Bigby and Snow's children and their adventures. They're off roaming around and getting into trouble.
Okay.
So
Next generation.
Nice.
next generation, you might say, and major stuff happens, doom and
course.
gloom, a lot of heroics,
Cool.
etc. So
And consequences.
exactly.
That's the big thing now. Consequences. There's always consequences.
Hey guys, welcome back. Was that a good interview? We really enjoyed talking to Steve. I'd love to have him back on. I'm sure he's got a lot more stories to tell, but yeah, that Star Wars story was awesome. Just the length of his career and all the various projects he's worked on. Really an unsung commodity in the comic industry.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar, or I didn't think I was familiar with Steve's work before this interview. But after taking a look at his resume and all of the work that he's done, I found out that I was indeed very familiar with his work, especially a lot of what he did at Vertigo and on that long run on Fables, which is such a very unique creative series. And I beseech you to search that out and all of Steve's other work. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of Dollar Bin Bandits. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and we will see you on the flip side. Peace.